Hello, folks. Hello, folks online. I think you can probably hear me now.
Perfect.
Great. Okay, good morning, everybody in the room, everybody online. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming to the second of the poetry sessions this year's conference, a continuation of the one that's just happened here in this room before the break. This session is entitled Movements. We have 3 presentations. We're all aiming to use 8 minutes or less. So hopefully there'll be plenty of time for some dialogue and conversation afterwards, both with folks online and everybody here too. We're going to go with the order on the program. So that means we're going to begin with our friend and colleague and previous member of the ICAE committee, the inaugural committee, Tim Buescher. Hi, Tim. Great to have you here. And Tim's piece is called Advance, Retreat, Surrender.
The captain places the flag on my palms, the rough cloth heavier than it seems in those Hollywood Arlington widow scenes. Perhaps because, despite my having seen it resting neatly folded on the shoulder of a gravestone, in a crowd of people wrapped for Flanders, or for parade flags in hand, or for office with chains, medals, and lanyards, the link between events and objects, symbols, had fragmented. Casting round for someone to fall in with. Oh, pardon me, technical hitch. Casting round for someone to fall in with, only my poor fallen ancestor was recognisable. One I could be sure of at plot 2F8. His name, the date, the inscription from his brother's grave. Why the mother chose these words, we can't know now, but given that this was all she could say, we said again for her, uncertain if she would repeat it for the second son, wishing for her faith to have withstood the blows. I see his eyes. He salutes, says something I think I should retain forevermore, but it is gone. Not the eyes, though. Speaking of our son, before formalities begin, this man, his face deceivingly youthful, tells me how this 19-year-old is big brother to the Royal Yorkshire Regiment. A case for new recruits. They know him more than I do. And now 2 sides of his family hold his cause over his plot. And between us here, he saturates the colours. This was written in response to some incidental ethnography when I was invited by the Ministry of Defence to attend the rededication of my great-great-uncle's grave at Tynecut Cemetery in Belgium around Easter of last year. He died, it says, at 19, not many weeks after his brother died, both at the Passchendaele, the Third Battle of the Beach. They had both been through the Somme and Arras, and were nearly at the end. It was 1917. They were towards the end of the First World War, and they were both killed there in the fighting. And it left behind in Beverley, where I still reside, their mother and their sister. Their sister, it seems, had a history of mental illness, and this precipitated particularly bad time. This led me into some documentary research. I've also been conducting some records-based research, which is difficult because mental health records are embargoed for 100 years in the UK. So I can't see a lot of what happened. But I do know that there was a direct reference to being accused of deaths in great-grandma Rachel's experience. The Pathé Gazette, December 1917. It's cold in the playhouse tonight. She wonders, being the eldest, Do they have the coats? Coming in, she passed that poster again. Women of Britain say go. No, she whispers. Dad already gone. Who knows where? Now 2 more. Looking up from the piano, she sees so many faces. Not theirs. And then dark. Only the glow of cigarettes in silence. Pity flutters from the balcony to settle on her lamp. Someone mutters, "Did you hear?" She erects a wall of major chords, feels the lifeless ivory sink at her touch, but hears nothing, senses no vibration. And knowing none she knows well wells. The bubba of a generator, gattle clack of a projector, are met with her reticent march. Pictures flicker with a jerk, smiling Tommies lining trenches. She hits the keys with force. Stared, scared, the women, children, old men sing out toward the front, and she, bound up with guilt, conscripted piper, trapped between the sounds, reciting eyes closed, sees the postcards on the mantle, Som, Aris, Eep, and knows no one is that lucky. Searching the screen deep into the frame, weak hands still moving, making music hall songs, the ones those two love best. Maybe they'll turn to camera, wave. I have some of those postcards upstairs from various relatives. And so what happened with the documentary research was it spread far and wide across this generation. The project's getting very big. War is a massive feature of my family. My paternal grandfather was a German prisoner of war in the UK, did 2 tours of the Russian front, starting when he was 19. My grandmother's brother died in a military vehicle accident during peacetime in Italy when the war had finished. Sam John died there, and the legacy of trauma as well. But it goes on and on and on and rumbles around. Not to mention, of course, all the people who came back and brought with them all the shit that they picked up during the war, all the madness that didn't get spoken, and all the things that ripple through our family experience. I haven't got time to tell you about all the secrets my auntie told me on Saturday about my grandma, but by God, it was rich. What I will do though is say that it's all building towards a head, I think. So here's data. There's data. These poems are data, much like the collages we were talking about yesterday. Responsive data generated from work with documents in archives, trips to Belgium, conversations with family, and many other things. And where was it going? I wasn't sure, but I think this is a suggestion as maybe where I'm headed. Advance, retreat, surrender. From the trench you rise, Lance Corporal. A chevron on each shoulder indicates your upward trajectory, pointing down your arm toward your capable hand, your gun, the enemy. You charge. Forward, wherever that is. The end. Charging forward, wherever that is, in retreat, my ambition eaten by the toad, I turn mutely up the road, eyes pulled along the tarmac, chevron after chevron, mirrored overhead in ragged V's of geese. The geese, in ragged V's, fly out or home or out again, the clipped wing of the second wave, stacking, sliding, meshing, broken chevrons, wavering forwards, wherever that is. To them, it doesn't matter. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Tim. I can feel the reverberations in the room. Very powerful. The second presentation is me, and I'm going to share this piece as a film today. I think maybe I'll just say a couple of words to give some context to it. For a long time, I've been involved in research in physical activity and mental health. For years, that was working with other people, learning about their experiences. But of course, as is often the case, it started with my own experience, my own use of physical activity over many years. So the last few years, I've started trying to use autoethnographic approaches to look at some of those experiences. And in this year, I've just started a new project using filmmaking, storytelling, poetry, and music as I have before, but trying to look specifically, which fits with some of the other work that we've heard about today and yesterday, with a look at mental health with an eye on consciousness, what we're experiencing, but also what is emerging or presenting itself to our awareness, our attention, our feelings, our sensations, hopefully, or possibly in a way that is connected to more than we might have, or I might have been previously connected to. So the film is, what we're going to do is show it. It's on YouTube, so I'd like to invite those of you online to access the film via the link that Jesse has very kindly put in the chat. The film's only about 6 minutes long, so you can watch, and then once you've watched, return, and we'll just finish up here. And then Jesse, again, is kindly going to screen the film for those of us in the room.
Might always. I was asked to write something about the therapeutic moment by Brian Keith Alexander for a book he was putting together. And the question I asked myself is, what therapeutic work might be uncovered through the creative process? And I used Rosick's question, what is necessary to let go of in order to learn who I may become? And without letting go, how can we be made anew? And in professional sport, I've learned it's very difficult to let go of the very thing other people value. And when these memories remain fixed in the others' minds and bodies, how can I let go of them? So while I feel I had a little problem letting go of the golfer to become something other, she has often returned to me like the incoming tide, begrudgingly. So these poems speaks to those moments. And the collection is Then and Now. And the first poem is The Year I Played in 32 countries on 4 continents in 38 weeks. And it's called 1992. France, Germany, Holland, Portugal, Spain, Japan, Sweden, Belgium, Italy, luscious languages, tasting frenzies, granite to terracotta, green to gold, arid to flood, mud to dust, and on, evading winter. We fly to the sun, Colombia, Taiwan, Thailand, Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, Australia, jungle, palm trees, tarmac airstrips rising from blue oceans, and clouds hung in the sky. A nomad with eyes wide and a thirsty heart. 2, queuing for the phone. Back in the days before Wi-Fi and modems, before cloud storage and data centers, before 5G and tetrabytes, text and WhatsApp, I waited for the phone box in the middle of the night and took my turn, hoping at the other end I would find a familiar voice. What was it? Sound? Familiarity? Life going on in the background? Was I living the life, or were they? 3, missing. Homesick is the closest term, but it's more than that. A kind of existential loss, sadness, creeping, ripping, arriving in waves. Leaving is hard. Being away. Everything is fine, dandy, but something is also not all right, and it has no words. A deep sorrow, an ease, a disturbance, a yearn, perhaps that the Welsh might term hireth. A yearn. I can have fun, enjoy life, see beauty, excel, and yet something is missing. One pause in the work. Muscle memory, harmony in tandem, action potential. Releasing a fountain of nerve impulses. Isometric and invisible, filaments, chains, tension, force, load. My muscles called forth to flex and extend, tighten and loosen, to the right, then the left, again and again and again and again. Curl and unfoil, curl and unfoil, curl and unfoil, twist and release. But in every swing, can you notice a moment of pause? Set midway between a 3-second burst, neither back nor forth, neither left nor right, a moment of change. Missed by most, a secret, tiny, irreducible, real, and vital. 5, part of me is missing. Have you seen it? What is it? That bit of me that's missing. No, what shape is it? I don't know. You don't look like something's missing. I know, but I can feel it. Where? I don't know. I just know part of me is missing. The field and the driving range. I went to practice. Now they go to train. I entered a space amidst fields and hedgerows. Now it's the range, allotted by time, bounded by wire. I stood on grass, rye, fescue, Bermuda. Now they stand on astroturf. I retrieved my own balls, searched among the daisies, sang songs and became a poet. Now there's a tractor with a trailer harvesting balls and perhaps a mindless driver in his gap year. Life sucked down the drain, around and around he goes, counting the hours. I poured my booty of gleaming white 1.6-inch balls, dimpled and smiling. Now there's automations, balls spewed forth from a dispenser. Catch them if you can, boom, 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 boom. And as I practiced, I became lost in the moment, creating shapes in the dew with my ball. A deer moves across the horizon, rabbits look on. Now each moment is managed, shots fired out across the range, boom, boom, boom. Little room to watch or notice. Pay attention, says the coach, log each hour, train, train, train. I made up games. Now they follow a rule book. How do they savor what is on offer? I'm creative. I ponder such things and what is being lost. 8. Another pause, now searching for slack water. High up, stranded on the rack line, the intertidal trees among debris, crustaceans, bleached timber, starfish, whale bones, plastic cars, dolls' legs, fishing lines, and plastic bottles. I sit and watch, giddy from the wafting scent of kelp-tangled ribbons 10 feet long, abandoned by the last ebbings of a falling tide. And I'm lost in the sound of the Atlantic. Roll and tumble, the waves come again and again, urgent and unspent. Rise and unfurl, rise and unfurl, rise and unfurl, spit and release, spit and tease. But in every sequence, is it possible to notice a moment of pause when the incoming tide decides to retreat? And out it goes, begrudgingly, little by little, hanging on, fingers digging in, resisting the inevitable. But in every sequence, hidden, perhaps, black water, neither ebb nor flow, neither in nor out, nor rising nor falling, when the ocean and tide are unstressed and undecided. Then, silently, the outgoing tide decides to return, at times by stealth, creeping up the galleys and marching without hail or oscillating rips, at other times, like today, hurling its intentions onto the rocks. And I ponder these things too, and what is being found.
Wonderful, thank you. Lovely. I love the movement as well. We have plenty of time for responses, comments, thoughts, questions, sharings online or from anyone in the room.
Hello, I'm Bethan. I live near Llanfair Pwll Gwyngyll Gogarwch yn Drobwll Llandysilio Gogogoch in North Wales. And I'm a musician and music educator. And lovely Tim. You know, it's really annoying with that huge beard. We can't lip read on the screen. But I caught Marta Argerich and the major chords on the piano, and it made me think of the lady in the van and her story at the end of the film. Sorry, those references might mean nothing to anybody in the room, but he knows. So my question is, when you get all those pieces of archival information and the stuff you carry in your body when you go visiting places, what's your process? How do you get to the place of distillation that we hear resonating through your poems? Because that's a huge process of processing and you're sitting with all this stuff. So could you just talk about from the stuff to the poem? Thank you.
Yeah, sure, Bethan. Thanks for that question. And it's lovely to hear your voice. Yeah, and also thank you for your presentation yesterday, which has got quite a lot in common. I think we're going in similar places. I think other people are as well. The conference has got quite a lot of ghosts in it. Right. So, yeah, so we say a process, and it's a kind of like almost like a dogged perseverance at times. So there's, in particular, the trip to Belgium, there was so much coming in at the same time, and as I was leaving the country, people were trying to give me things to read, to study, a book of local history that was full of errors and documents about people's possessions, which are still coming in now. Just this weekend, I gained a didgeridoo and a postcard from World War One. It's because now I've become a family target for this stuff, if you like, you know. So anyway, during the trip, walking works for me the best to process things. And so this is a very boiled down niche example, but basically something similar will be going on for each bit. So I've got all this stuff, and I've looked over it and over it, and I'm the same with theory. I look over and over it, I wonder about, and whatever sticks. If it doesn't, it's gone. There's a poet who lives near here called Dean Wilson. I don't expect anybody will have heard of him because he's very local. He writes in a kind of a whole vernacular about funny things. But he was being interviewed, and he put his work together when he was a postie mostly. So if he was lucky enough to stop between addresses and his bag was empty, he could stop and make a note on the back of an envelope or something for an idea. If he didn't, it just went, you know, and you just got to let it go with good grace, to quote our Prime Minister hilariously. What remains is what remains. I've actually gained a poem out of that even. So I found myself wandering around the Menin Gate in Ypres, with all these thousands of names etched on it from the missing from the First World War. And I was walking round and round and round, and that became the basis of a sort of meditative poem on that, the silliness of wandering around the gate looking for an answer. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's what I do.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for the question, Bethan. Anybody online like to speak? Anyone else in the room?
I'm rarely speechless, but this really does leave me speechless. 3 people working at the height of their craft and at the height of, I think, mature critical reflection on lives that are so rich, they have a whole lot to say, right? It seems like the exemplar of so many things that we are talking about. So 3 of my favorite people doing 3 of maybe my favorite pieces of theirs. But the theme that comes to me is how each of them are so deeply grounded in place, a poetry of a particular body in place. So, Tim, your place in history through the absent bodies of your ancestors, right? That wonderful image of two parts of a family standing over that grave, right? Can't be dissociated from that. David, you like the rest of our colleagues from Cornwall, can't be separated from that coast. These images and the weave of the delicacy of the flowers and the softness of the sand as you're talking about softening in an area that's not, I don't really think of as soft. You know, the waves and the rock and the crashing, and you find soft spaces in there. Ooh, and Kitrina, you have an ability to take us right inside the tiniest moment. And sometimes we forget how extraordinary in multiple ways and multiple careers you have been. But I just picture you out in that meadow, that gorgeous piece of how you used to be out in the meadow with the balls, and now this kind of neoliberal golf course stealing of it. And it's just extraordinary, your body in place and your performance of it. So also kudos there. You take it to the level of the theatricality. So that one of your extraordinary skills is you're a really good actor, voice actor. Dang. Beautifully done. Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank you, Elise. That's wonderful. Kitrina or Tim, would you like to?
Sometimes Elise said that we have some amazing skills, but that doesn't mean that we're vulnerable and that we don't practice and work at them. And, you know, David and I don't know about Tim, but we share things with each other. We test them when we try them out. So we're doing a lot in the background that doesn't get seen in the actual performance. And so by the time we come to perform, it's fairly well polished most of the time. And so there's a lot of work still going on. And it doesn't matter, but sometimes then other people think, I can never reach that standard. And so I would encourage you, it doesn't really matter in this environment. If you need it to be a practice place, great, go on. It can make, you can, you know, have errors in your performance, that's okay. But you, Edwina, are an example of how you've taken your craft and you've developed it across the years. And, you know, I would encourage others of you to do the same, basically.
Yeah, could I respond to that, to Kitrina's response? In a nosy way. And also because I'm conscious that, like, I started answering a question from Beth, and I'm forgiving my brain, it doesn't stay where it's supposed to. So practice is everything, and editing is everything. I've been bringing poetry to this conference, which wasn't called this back in 2018 when I first stood in the album hall of an band, and then did a poem then. That poem wasn't edited. It was a spontaneous outpouring, as somebody said earlier on. It was just a moment of, I could not convey my findings, because what the fuck are findings anyway? And it was a really difficult kind of time of trying to make sense of something in an institutional language. And I found myself in a small room at the University of Hull, where I then worked, and as a student, trying to express how I'd married all these different bits and pieces together, and it became. But in the end, I just read the poem and divided the room and carried on in that idiom, but knew that at some point I needed to get better at this bit. So, like Jonathan mentioned earlier on, I did an MA, and I did it for the purposes of doing this better. Not that you don't have to do an MA to do that, but you have to join a community of writers, right? So I joined a community of poets, and now I'm a member of four, I think, different writing, editing, poetry groups with people who are all much better at it than me. But that's what you need to invest in. I think you've got to invest in the thing, haven't you? Whether you believe in 10,000 hours or just doing a lot. So I do a lot in a very sort of wonky way of answering, but an awful amount of editing, huge amount of editing.
Neil here. First off, just a reflection. Thank you for sharing that and the performances and everything. And I have a bit for everyone. Tim, I just have a reflection for you, and then a question for David, and a question for Kitrina, if that's okay. So my reflection is, I, as a really stupid young hothead, had joined the French Foreign Legion in a kind of a previous life. And when you read, I started thinking with that brain, and I was like, I'm really glad I'm not in a grave somewhere in a distant country. So it's just, and at the time I wasn't thinking like that anyway, you know, or this way. I was like, oh, if I could die in service of this big miraculous thing, how good. But I'm so glad that I didn't, and can listen to your stories. So thank you for that. David, my question to you is around the making. I really love the connection between the poetry and the imagery you selected, and I wondered whether there was a connection, intentional connection, between where you were tracking in the poem and the images you shared. So I'll give to you now, and then Kitrina, to you around home, being homesick, and whether the homesickness then and your construct of home, whether that had changed between then and now, or is that still the same home?
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, I'm definitely striving for some sort of connections between the words themselves, the sound of the words, the sound of my voice, the use of the microphone, the sonics, as somebody said in one of our workshops last week, and the images and what is still and what is moving. There's something I'm striving for there. And I think I'm beginning to recover from 20, more 30 years of academic work, of analyzing everything, of trying to think it through, think it out, and decide as exclusively a cognitive or mental process, and get back to where I was before I started studying degrees in the university, of feeling. How does it feel? And there's a wonderful podcast, there's a series called Broken Record, and there's a wonderful one with the Edge, the guitarist from U2, who writes a lot of their music and I think produces a lot of it. And Rick Rubin, who's one of the most successful producers of the last few decades. And they both talk about how when they're listening back to a recording, they don't think about it. They tune into the gut, stomach. So Edge is doing it as a musician. Okay, how does this feel? What am I feeling listening back to this recording? Rick Rubin said, he doesn't play any instrument, he doesn't write music, he doesn't read music, he doesn't understand the equipment, but he's one of the most successful producers in recent decades. And all I do is close my eyes, listen, and notice what I'm feeling. And the decisions, the suggestions that I make to the artists or the engineers in the studio are based on that feeling. And so that's my understanding of what I'm trying to do with film now. You know, I've learned from Kitrina, started us off with films 15 years ago, wasn't it? And when you talked about it yesterday in your piece of how does it, when you click play, what do you feel? It's really hard for me to get to that because I've allowed myself to be socialized into what do I think. There is a place for that, of course, but it's not everywhere. And I think with this work, it's, okay, what do I feel watching this? And then I will try, I'm feeling, maybe it's working, I'm feeling something, and maybe share it with others and sort of see where if they get anything from it. That's really what I'm interested in more than anything is. But thanks for the question. Kitrina, do you remember the question?
And what that space actually, I'm glad you asked before, because I probably wouldn't have remembered this had you just asked straight away. And David and I were talking about this earlier on, and I find the answer in a song. And in January, I was asked to do a performance at Carolyn and Arts Conference in Florida, and I wrote a performance piece, and those poems were in it, and some other stories as well. And there was a song I wrote about my journey and about my father. And we had a safeguarding workshop earlier in the week, and I used the term for the first time it came to me, an escape hatch. I couldn't sing the song in the moment because I knew I wouldn't get through it, because there were truths in the song that I couldn't present at that time. And when David and I were talking about that this morning, and we were talking about home as well, I think home has given me a safe place. And because it's safe, I can go out everywhere and return back. But there's still a yearning that's there. And the lyrics in the song that come up 3 times is the urge to turn the tiller homeward bound, the lure to travel on. And those are the things I think that are at the center of my experience. And later, I've traveled around this world so many a times now, and folks have been so kind. The urge to turn the tiller homeward bound and the lure to carry on, it still remains in my 65-year-old body. My home has been the same place for 60 years on the Bristol Channel. So there's the two of them meet is the best way I have of describing it. Thank you for the question.
Akil, I think you had your hand up and have been patiently waiting.
Thank you. Yes, I just wanted to ask, I was just curious about this powerful piece that you all were presenting, performing, and what Kitrina just mentioned before about how you were practicing before, where we're not seeing it, but you're practicing a lot with David, and but at the same time, David, in your video, you were talking about doing less, like not working, perhaps. You were mentioning about the sequence, simple, small, and gentle. The less I do, the better. So like, I was just curious about, practicing a lot behind, but yet you're talking also about doing less. So I was just curious about these things. Because in Japan, we say that, don't put your effort too much. Don't try to do anything. Just let things happen. Let the bigger nature control you. Let the bigger nature move you. So do less. So that, like I was, connecting with these thoughts. So I wanted to ask your thoughts too.
Thank you, Akil. You've expressed it beautifully, to be honest. I don't know what to say. I mean, as we all are very aware, we're shaped by our culture, aren't we? Those immediately around us, those we encounter, what's going on in the workplace, the country. So I see and feel it's too much. Things are too much for me most of the time. So I think I've been on I grew up in sport culture. My father was a PE teacher. I played sport, not to a high level like Kitrina, but it was about work and about what I would see as a myth of mental toughness, about training harder, being faster, punishing, pushing, beating, being strong in a very particular way. And I think I was kind of exhausting myself and cutting off access to sensitivities and sensibilities and vulnerabilities and connections through that. So I think I got to a point probably 15 years ago, it was also by being in academia, I think, full-time job, of just needing to slow down, not be so frightened, not be so worried, try to start feeling safe, not push myself, learn self-compassion, learn to be kind, and as you put it beautifully, trying to feel the world, just a bigger world, beyond myself. So for me, meditation and yoga have been really important in that over quite a few years of very slow and stubborn learning and transformation. And I just think I could still do less and I would be healthier and happier, actually. But that really feels like that clashes with much of our culture, certainly the workplace, but more widely often too. So thank you for the question. I'll come to Alex in a moment. Tim, did you want to respond on that issue?
Yeah, I think because it's a really interesting point to speak to, isn't it? So I'm not retiring at the age, but I've left academic work, took a much lesser, if you like, role, part time, to be able to do other things. I'm lucky to be in a position like that. I'm not unaware of the amount of privilege I have to marry to somebody who can hold things and to be given up, the payoff that you can get when you leave academia, to be able to do that for a bit. But even without that, with that escape, there's still something that lives inside your head, which if you're not careful, will start to creep in and start asking you when you're going to win a poetry competition, or when the BBC are going to pick up that screenplay, or they're not. I'm not doing this to live. This is it is to live, but in a much more essential way than financially. It's to remember that, to keep coming back to that, requires meditation, requires presence, which in itself requires the space. So for me, I think it's a difficult balance, because if I don't pay attention carefully to what's going on inside, I'll end up really busy. And I'm not as good at that as Kitrina is. It doesn't work out as well. So there's something living in us all as part of this society that we live in, especially if we're working in higher education. You'll be pulled into that particular kind of mindset. So being in the company of, in the presence of people who share values and who embody positive ways of being, like y'all, is really, really important, so important. And that's what's kept me together through academic turmoil and non-academic mysteries, what we call this at the moment, whatever this is.
Great, thanks, Tim.
So thank you, Dave and Kitrina.
I'm probably just for one more. So
well, it's just a comment, really. I suppose something that sparked in my mind from listening to you, because the standout line for me was more home than I was before. And then if you combine that with you saying you've had this 60-year home, but actually there's a difference between coming home after 32 countries in 38 days and coming home from work. And I guess it's transformed in mine the thought of home as this static place that stays there, as that the home itself is dynamic.
Thanks, Alex. It's a lovely framing. So in my work, I look at kind of belonging and what home is, and home for me is where kind of love is and life is. But there's also a bit of a phrase that homecomings are hauntings, whether you come back to the same place because you are no longer the same person, and the place is no longer the same, even if it is just a short thing. And I think that's the construct and the complexity of us, whether we can notice the change in ourselves and the place, and it's still the home. It's a fascinating kind of thought there. Thank you.
okay, I think it's a good time to finish. Early lunch is always good in my book. Thank you, Kitrina, Tim, for your wonderful pieces. Thank you to those of you online for joining, for your engagement and responses, and thank you to everyone in the room.